Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. And as always, it's your one-stop shop to take stock of all the progress on the political and literal battlefields. Let's go ahead now and get started. Russian forces ramped up their air attacks this week. Thousands of civilians had to flee to bunkers, and the military used as many resources as it could to stop hundreds of Russian missiles and drones in what some are saying were the largest aerial attacks on Ukraine thus far.
On Monday, Moscow conducted the largest series of airstrikes since the beginning of the war. The Ukrainian Defense Forces were able to shoot down 102 out of 127 missiles launched by Russia and 99 out of 109 drones. 7 people were killed and 50 were injured in the attack. Large parts of Ukraine were also put under air raids alert on Tuesday, and the attacks continued throughout the week.
Kyiv's residents gathered to mark the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Volodymyr to honor all those who have made the greatest sacrifice. August 29th is recognized in Ukraine as the day of commemoration of fallen Ukrainian defenders.
The Battle of Ilovaisk ended in the largest loss Ukraine had suffered during the Donbas War. Russian forces massacred over 360 Ukrainian troops, even though the Ukrainians had been retreating through an agreed-upon corridor. More than 400 Ukrainian soldiers were wounded, and some 400 were taken prisoner. President Zelenskyy commemorated the battle, dubbing it one of the biggest crimes ever committed by the Russian occupiers. Ilovaisk remains under Russian occupation to this day.
On Thursday, the Ukrainian military reported that one of the country's F-16 fighter jets crashed while repelling a Russian attack. The aircraft's pilot has reportedly died in the incident.
The aircraft was destroyed during the Russian drone and missile strike on Monday. Ukrainian military reports say that prior to the crash, the pilot was able to shoot down 4 Russian cruise missiles. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has established a special commission to investigate the circumstances of the crash. The crash site has not yet been disclosed.
Ukraine has unveiled a domestically manufactured long-range rocket drone. President Zelenskyy confirmed its first successful test fire during his Independence Day speech on August 24th.
The new weapon is estimated to have a range of nearly 600 kilometers, which puts several Russian air bases within its reach. Palyanitsia's biggest advantage is that, unlike in the case of Western weapons, Ukrainians do not need to obtain permission to fire into Russian territory. Zelenskyy is hopeful that the missile will allow the Ukrainian armed forces to strike key Russian military infrastructure. Ukraine's digital transformation minister Mikhailo Fedorov claims that the production of one Palyanitsia missile costs less than $1 million.
I thought it is too early to speak about it, but I would like the society to evaluate our team who work around the clock at the defense enterprises. There was a successful test of the first ballistic Ukrainian missile, and I congratulate the defense industry with this fact. I cannot share more details about the missile.
And now it's that time in the program to look at the war in Ukraine through the lens of a journalist. Now let's go to Kyiv, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is waiting for us. Hello, Oz.
Good evening.
Ukrainian authorities have reported that Oleksiy Mess, a pilot of the Tactical Aviation Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Force, who was one of the first to train as an F-16 fighter pilot, has died. He died on August 26. What can you tell us about the situation?
So, yes, this came in earlier in the week that we'd heard the Ukrainian pilot had died, but no further details had came out. It was only when U.S. officials started briefing that an F-16 was lost did it become clearer that this had happened, that an F-16, one of the few F-16s that Ukraine has in its arsenal, has been lost. Now, since we reported that story, it's moved on slightly. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense have opened a special commission to investigate the death of Oleksiy Mess. It's still unclear how he died, whether that was a technical fault on the plane, whether that was pilot error. We believe that a friendly fire incident has not been ruled out, although U.S. officials did say that they didn't think that it had been shot down by enemy fire. So it's still murky, still unclear what exactly happened. But the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense will be hoping that they can get to the bottom of it and release those details, not just to the Ukrainian people, but also the partners of Ukraine who are assisting with this investigation. It is a very sad death. I will say that the loss of a Ukrainian pilot is much more devastating for Ukraine than the loss of a donated F-16. Those pilots have incredibly rare training. It's incredibly difficult, grueling, intensive training. And particularly, Ukraine has very few of those Ukrainian pilots who are cleared to have been trained to fly the F-16s. So it's a really dark week for Ukraine. We can't pretend that this isn't a big loss for the Ukrainian Air Force. It's been made clear by the government here, by the Air Force. There is no trying to cover this up as anything other than a tragedy, particularly given how few of the resources Ukraine has in this department. So Ukraine will be hoping to draw a line under this with this investigation and hope that it won't hinder the progress of more F-16s and more pilots being trained to use them.
Yeah, especially more pilots. That seems to be the limiting factor there, right? Because they got more planes than pilots, and the more pilots, the merrier. But this is war, and these are the consequences. Oz Chatterjee joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. As the Ukrainian offensive in Russia's Kursk region continues, Moscow has been forced to redeploy some 30,000 soldiers, according to the commander of Ukraine's armed forces, General Syrsky. At the same time, the situation in Pokrovsk in Ukraine's east remains difficult, to say the least, for Kyiv's forces. Now let's take a look at the latest developments on the front lines.
3 weeks into its offensive into Kursk, Ukraine continues to advance.
We have 1,300 square kilometers of territory under our control. 100 settlements are located on this territory. Also, thanks to the successful actions of our troops, we have significantly replenished the prisoner exchange fund. To date, 594 servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been captured on this front.
Military experts assert that one of the objectives of the Kursk operation was to divert enemy forces from other areas, particularly Pokrovsk and Kurakovsk. Although some 30,000 Russian servicemen have already been redeployed from Ukraine to the Kursk front, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, reports that Russians continue to focus their main efforts on the Pokrovsk area.
The situation on the Pokrovsk front is fairly difficult. Throughout last week, we've seen an average of 50 skirmishes per day. The enemy is using their advantage in personnel weapons and military equipment. They're actively using artillery and aviation.
Several Russian sources report that Ukrainians have attempted to take their offensive across the border in other points. Russian forces have reportedly repelled several Ukrainian attacks south of Belgorod city and near the Shebekino border checkpoint south of Belgorod. Ukrainian forces also continue to operate immediately southeast of Koronevo and near Sudza. Faced with attacks in several points, Moscow was forced to halt its attack in some other parts of Ukraine.
In Ukraine's south, the enemy's activity has decreased to some degree. This is mainly a result of Russia transferring troops and equipment to the Kursk front.
Zelenskyy continues to call on Ukraine's allies to lift restrictions on the use of donated weapons.
We continue to insist that decisiveness now, lifting Ukraine's restrictions on long-range strikes, will help us end the war as soon as possible in a way that is fair to Ukraine and the world at large.
Ukraine's Western allies, however, remain cautious.
And now I'd like to welcome to the program Demir Toi, co-founder of Liberty Ukraine Foundation. They've been fundraising for the Ukrainian Armed Forces since 2014. Hello, Demir. Thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
Now, really, we have so many things to cover this week that have, and last week, that have really taken place overall in Ukraine. But I'd like to start off and get your opinion from a Ukrainian perspective, based on what we're seeing with Ukraine's push into the Kursk region and the concentration there, while the certain areas, those hotspots on the front lines from Kupiansk down to Konstantinivka, Chasiv Yar, and then, of course, near Pokrovsk, well, they're looking like worse and worse every day. So from your perspective, do you think that this operation is shaping up due to the successes in Kursk? Do you think it's kind of a trade-off? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's a great question, but I would like to start with the fact that Ukraine doesn't want or need Russian territory, right? So Ukraine was forced to do the strategical move to enter Kursk region for various reasons. So one of the first one is we're actually protecting our civilian population in Kharkiv and Sumy region, because as you know, there was a lot of attacks from Kursk region, ballistic missiles, gliding bombs. So by doing that, Ukraine is actually saving their own people in Kharkiv and Sumy. Another thing is, as we know, Russians were actually getting ready to attack and enter Kharkiv region even deeper and Sumy region. So that move from Ukrainian armed forces was, on one hand, very unexpected, but on the other hand, is very logical, right? Mm-hmm. So, and also we don't have to forget about the boost of morale for Ukrainian soldiers, because now they know how important that mission is to save people and protect people in Kharkiv region. But anyhow, Ukraine is not planning to annex those territories. It's creating a buffer to make sure that Ukrainian civilians are well protected. On the other hand, we will all understand that the stage of war is very wide, and meanwhile, while we're having some successes in Kursk region, the situation near Pokrovsk is dire and critical, but I think that's the reality of war. But I could tell you this, that Ukrainians surprised the enemy throughout the war so many times, and we hope that's exactly the same situation here. And we hope we're gonna see Ukrainian armed forces in action.
Yeah, the Ukrainian forces have been very, very good in the art of surprise. Not only did they surprise the enemy this time, but they even surprised the West. And that's also an interesting thread, that they didn't communicate their plans, unlike the counteroffensive of last summer. They did not communicate this with their Western partners. Do you think that's a good strategy? Maybe that's the way to go to allow better operational security, because obviously the more people you tell, the more chances that it can get back to the enemy.
Look, it's very hard to say anything about decisions of the commanders of armed forces of Ukraine. But at the same time, if that works and we were successful, maybe that's the way to go. Maybe that's the way how Ukrainian army could actually do things much better, right? So, as we know, as you said last year, that counterattack was not that successful because everyone knew and Russians were expecting it. Attack in Kursk region was not expected by anyone, right? So it was a surprise. Absolutely. So I believe that was a great decision by our commanders, and I hope we're going to continue being successful.
Now, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, announced the four-point plan for victory. And while he gave us some details, there is still some open questions. If you, listening to his words, could, I don't know, expand on that and tell us exactly what do you think that this whole plan means, and what is the West going to have to do to make this plan actually work for Ukraine?
I think the latest moves from Ukraine on the battlefield, they are pretty much connected to everything that was going to be happening in the next few months, right? We have a General Assembly. We're getting ready with the Peace Summit #2. So we need to have a leverage, right? But what's important to understand that without Western support and without military Western support, Ukraine will not be able to accomplish any of those steps, right? So we need to make sure that Ukraine can protect its citizens, Ukraine could protect its territory, and make sure we're actually pushing the enemy outside from our country. So it's very important to understand that the Western help and support cannot stop. We actually need to increase it and just to continue that and to gain the momentum in this war. So the main thing, and that's that we as an organization and as Ukrainians will continue talking to all our American friends, friends in Europe and organizations and governments, saying exactly the same thing. We need to have the tools. and we're going to do the job.
Yeah, if you read between the lines a little bit, I think we're seeing, well, we've seen Dmytro Kuleba come out and say, we've prepared the situation on the ground, now the choice is yours, talking to the West. He also blamed those that are citing red lines or escalation as just an excuse for a failure to make a concrete decision. We've been talking for months about the fact that the whole slogan, as long as it takes, is not a strategy, it's just a political slogan. So it seems to me that the Ukrainian leadership is very well aware of the fact that certain decisions need to be made, and those decisions are the long-range weapons, allowing Ukraine to strike what the Institute for the Study of War has come out and found 280 targets within ATACMS range right now on Russian territory. So
the Western allies, they are expecting Ukrainians to show some results. There are no doubts about that. We know that, right? We need to show the results. And I'm pretty sure Ukraine has been showing some great results in the past 2 months. But of course, the biggest problem that Ukraine is facing right now is ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and gliding bombs. And that's all we're talking about, the air superiority that Russians have, next to the borders. So the only way to stop them is just to hit their airfields that are pretty far away from Ukrainian border. And the only tools that we have, as you mentioned, and some American provided weapons that we want to have it right to use. So that's the crucial thing for us to actually turn this war into our favor. We just need to make sure that Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian defenders are not being bombed by more advanced weapons that we don't have. So yes, of course, we're asking Americans, we're asking the Europeans to allow Ukrainian army to use their weapons, NATO weapons, in order to hit Russian airfields and hit inside of Russia, hit the military installations in Russia to make sure that we're not being bombed, the gliding bombs are not falling on the heads of our civilians, our kids, and our soldiers.
Right, and again, another surprising element to the whole Kursk incursion is that Ukrainian troops have not only continued to expand in the Kursk region, but they are still there, and they're still holding ground, and they're digging in, and it's likely they're going to hold ground for some time. But with that said, there has to be a window of time that Ukraine has that is not very long. Again, they're going to need decisions from the West. How much time do you think Ukraine does have to wait on the West to make a decision, to be decisive as far as the long-range weapons go? And in addition, though, we also have to weigh the situation on the Eastern Front down in Pokrovsk, right? It's kind of a trade-off. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, first of all, I think we should expect some good news from Kursk region as well. Look, the POW question, right, prisoner of war question, and how many Ukrainian soldiers we have in Russia it's a very critical question to all of the Ukrainians, right? So one of the reasons why in Kursk we're getting we're capturing a lot of Russian soldiers with only one goal, to exchange them and to get our soldiers back, our civilians back. But we've been waiting for a very long time for everything that we just received, right? F-16s, HIMARS, and different weaponry that we've been waiting for a year, more than a year. So it's a very hard question. How much more time do we have? I mean, Ukrainians will stand there until till the end. Yeah. But it's crucial to get that help as soon as possible, right? So I cannot tell you exactly, is it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah.
But we are determined, and we're going to do everything we can to support our troops and make sure that Ukraine is just gaining independence back.
Yes, and I think the final thing I want to end on, we've seen actually one Russian drone shot down by Belarus. There's speculation that Belarus could enter into the conflict on Russia's side. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that that's a serious threat that is
So I've been working with the Ukrainian armed forces since 2014, so that's why we do have a lot of connections. We do talk to Ukrainian military personnel every day, and of course I've been asking about that question: how serious is the threat from Belarus? So it seems that Belarus has an army, but don't forget it's an unexperienced army. It's never participated in any conflicts, and it's a good thing. But we should definitely look at our north border and make sure that we are ready for whatever scenario that's going to happen over there. It's unfortunately Ukraine is a situation where there's multiple different directions where Russia or its proxies could attack. But that's one of the biggest concerns that we've been having for quite some time, and that's why when President of France announced that they are thinking of actually sending French troops, the idea was that they might actually cover the territory and the border with Belarus. So this way, it would be a relief to Ukrainian armed forces just to make sure that the border is well protected.
Right, because it ties up a lot of Ukrainian forces, doesn't it?
Of course. We're talking about the north border. We're talking about the border next to Moldova with that annexed territory, right? So that's all taking manpower and weaponry, and so it would be very helpful. So as far as Belarus, it's a threat. How serious that threat is, I hope, and I'm pretty sure that Ukrainian armed forces are well aware, and our intelligence services actually controlling the situation.
Yep. Well, Demir Toi, co-founder of Liberty Ukraine Foundation, fundraising for the Ukrainian armed forces since 2014. Thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine this week. We appreciate your thoughts. Ukraine continues its offensive in the Kursk region and on the diplomatic front. Earlier this week, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has announced the recent incursion into Russia's Kursk region is part of a broader victory plan he intends to present to U.S. President Joe Biden next month.
President Zelenskyy admits that the war with Russia will ultimately end in dialogue, and he is working to strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position.
One of the areas where part of the work has been done is the region of Kursk. The second is Ukraine's strategic place in the world's security infrastructure. The third is a powerful package to force Russia to end the war through diplomatic means. The fourth is economic. That part I won't talk about.
The meeting is expected to take place next month at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Zelenskyy revealed that he would also present the plan to Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
If the Russians know anything about our actions, we won't have any success, meaning we won't have any chance, meaning we will lose many things. We must, on our platform at the Peace Summit, be in a strong position. Of course, it will have to end in a dialogue, but we must have a strong position in that dialogue. That's it.
During his speech, President Zelenskyy also noted that Poland's military support has weakened in recent months and requested that the country donate its MiG fighter jets, which he says are much needed. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz responded, saying that Poland had to prioritize its own defense capability.
Poland understands Ukraine's position, but national security is our top priority when making decisions regarding military equipment. The Polish authorities have transferred billions of zloty worth of equipment to Ukraine. We donated everything we could. Poland has to preserve its defense capabilities. That is our #1 priority.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba visited Brussels on Thursday, where he once again called on Ukraine's allies to lift restrictions on the use of the weapons they provided.
And I'm calling on the European Union to play a role and to make their point very clearly and strongly that this is something that needs to be done now if we want to maintain the momentum, if we want to continue with suppressing the Russian capacity to destroy Ukraine and advance in the east of my country.
In fact, it's already going, and we will try to increase our support because Kuleba is right. Kuleba is right. It's clear that Ukrainian forces, well equipped, can change the course of the war. Not only defending themselves, but pushing back the invasion.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell promised his full backing. EU institutions and member states have pledged €39 billion in military support for Ukraine since the start of the invasion, but it's unclear how much of this figure has arrived in the war-torn country.
As we see this operation in the Kursk region entering its fourth week, self-imposed red lines seem to be the biggest bottleneck facing Ukraine at the moment. And now joining me here to discuss this is John Sweet, retired military intelligence officer. Hello, John. Thanks for joining us again here on Ukraine this week.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Yes. So, well, it looks, I was just discussing with our last guest, I think if you read between the lines here, if you look at this 4-point victory plan by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy that he is going to bring to the United States during the United Nations General Assembly, and if you look at Foreign Minister Demir Toi, who's trying to rally EU support for the use of the long-range weapons so that they can hit these targets, 280 of which have been identified by the Institute for the Study of War. ATACMS alone could take out those targets from Ukrainian soil. And, of course, the United States putting the block on storm shadows from France, United Kingdom, and the U.S. still not wanting to take a decisive move here. What do we do? Do we wait for the next administration to come in? Is there a certain individual in this administration that is holding everything up? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, those are great questions. Look, with President Zelenskyy going to New York here shortly to talk both to the president and the two presidential candidates, Harris and Trump, the intent obviously is to bring a plan to the United States that they can endorse and get behind. And right now, we just haven't seen it. We haven't seen a plan from the United States, and really haven't seen a plan from NATO other than those words of defend. And defend isn't going to win this war, and Zelenskyy understands that. So he's taken the fight to Russia. And what he wants to do is get the United States and NATO behind him so he can pressure Russia into some sort of negotiation that's on favorable terms to Ukraine. I think the end state he has said is that this will have a diplomatic solution, but it's going to have a diplomatic solution that they dictate, not one that Russia dictates.
Right, and it looks like this Kursk operation has definitely achieved that, at least thus far, and especially the longer they can hold on to it, to be in a position of strength if and when negotiations do take place. But I will refer again to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's 4-point plan. One of the points, part of which has already been implemented, is the offensive in the Kursk region. The second element is for Ukraine to occupy a strategic place in the global security infrastructure. The third is a powerful package to force Russia to end the war diplomatically. And the fourth is on the economy. And I'm quoting President Zelenskyy. I will not talk about that in detail. So these are just kind of, well, we don't have the exact details of what he's thinking. But reading those words, what do you think the plan is here? And do you think, like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off here, but do you think that Demir Toi, when he said it's now up to the West because Ukraine has created the conditions on the ground, and if there is no decision by the West, they can only blame themselves and not Ukraine?
Yeah, look, this is about maintaining momentum, maintaining the initiative, and getting the West on your side. Look, the continuing offensive operation in the Kursk region is key. But from Zelenskyy's perspective, it's all about putting pressure on Russia. And pressure on Russia is stating that, hey, NATO is going to bring Ukraine into the fold, 1. 2, we are going to give you the weapons that you need to conduct offensive operations and strike those targets that present a threat to you. Now, those targets presenting a threat primarily are the ballistic missiles and then the drones, but also artillery and the interdiction aspect of this war, which is troops moving into the area. Okay. And then the piece with the the economics, that's really the sanctions aspect. So it's relentless pressure. It's saying, we're going to give you weapons, we're going to get you into NATO, we're going to continue relentless pressure, and we're going to sanction you. And when we do all that, that's going to drive you to the table. And that's the plan I think ultimately Zelensky is looking for, is relentless pressure across those 4 domains to get Russia to the negotiation table and to leave Ukraine.
Window. I mean, Ukraine does not necessarily have time on its side due to the personnel shortages, the difficulties in mobilizing. They're not going to be able to keep this operation up in Kursk forever, I would assume. So therefore, a decision is going to need to be made, a decisive one, right? So is there a possibility that that can be achieved with the Biden administration, or is this probably going to have to wait till the next presidential administration, whichever one that may be, comes along?
Yes, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I'm not sure the Biden administration is currently managing the country is going to make any type of decision like that. I believe they can influence decisions, but I don't think they're going to make one. I don't think you can get either one of the candidates to get behind it either. So Washington's tricky. There's the political landscape of the 3 individuals at the top, but there's the congressional landscape also that can shape this. And within that congressional landscape, you do have bipartisan support.
Sorry, John, I think we got to repeat this. John, since we're pre-recording, I think we got to repeat this section.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I don't even know, but I don't even know what my, I don't know exactly what I was saying leading up to this. Oh, the window, right? The window.
You were asking me if Biden was going to make a decision.
Okay, I'll try and do this so that I'm speaking less.
Okay.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Ukraine can't keep this up indefinitely. They do have a window of time, and it seems like this time is presenting itself now for potentially Ukraine to make even bigger military gains if some certain decisive decisions are made. So I guess the big question now is, can the Biden administration actually go ahead and reduce their own self-imposed red lines and make a decision allowing Ukraine to help itself now, or is this going to have to be left up to the next administration in the United States, whichever one that may be?
Yeah, it will be a narrow window of time that Ukraine has. Look, when Ukraine launched its offensive, at one time, Zelensky was telling the world that his 8 brigades were undermanned and ill-equipped with equipment. Now, of course, that wasn't necessarily true because they launched the invasion shortly afterwards. But the Biden administration right now, I think they're still in paralysis hold. They're still worried about escalation. And I think they're going to be hesitant to make those type of decisions. I think their biggest concern is that Ukraine's going to use weapons to target deeper into Russia, into St. Petersburg and Moscow, when in fact I think Ukraine's only interested in targeting those areas which pose a direct threat to them. And by pushing forward and expanding their front, I think they put relentless pressure on Russia. But the politics of the time right now, you got a presidential election coming up. I just don't see a whole lot of strong decisions being made. I see a lot of we're behind you still, and we're going to continue to defend you, and we'll give you the weapons that we've been giving you. But the authorities piece, unfortunately, I'm just not confident that they're going to get the authorities that they need to strike those targets, which means they're going to have to turn inward to some of their own products that they're developing. An intercontinental ballistic missile is in the works, and also a deeper drone capability they've been working on also to be able to hit those strategic targets.
One thing that strikes me is the secrecy of this operation, this incursion into Kursk, was not shared with the United States. I think that's an element of surprise to all of us. And a lot of people have said, well, earlier during the last year's counteroffensive, when we were waiting, I mean, everybody was waiting for this with a lot of enthusiasm, but Ukraine had actually shared those plans too widely, and perhaps maybe it got out. Maybe the Russians were exactly aware of where the Ukrainian forces were going to try and hit. So what does that say about communicating these things with Ukraine, you know, for Ukraine to communicate certain things with its allies, how much should it communicate with its allies, and how much should it keep to itself and maybe say, I'm sorry, but now I'm telling you after the fact?
Yeah, sometimes it's better to beg forgiveness and ask for permission. I think had they gone probably to the United States and to NATO and asked permission to conduct this type of assault, that they would have tried to talk them out of that particular mission, and we would have missed an opportunity that they're experiencing now. You know, breaking through a weak border and then exploiting that breakthrough and pushing into Russia and forcing Russian military to abandon other positions in order to fill in the gap was brilliant. And in addition to that, it exposes Russian forces after they leave their defensive positions to have to move to new positions. They are constantly under threat of Ukrainian artillery, air, and drone strikes, and they have taken a beating repositioning forces. So it was a brilliant move, and OPSEC, again, is critical, and Ukraine has demonstrated that they can do that.
What do you think the risks would be if Ukraine did go ahead and use its Western-supplied weapons to strike those targets that right now it is technically not allowed to strike?
Yeah, I think initially the blowback from the West would be that we're not going to send you any more weapons, and that's a real threat. But I think it also depends upon the outcome too, which is, you know, difficult to explain. But depending upon its success, that it could drive, you know, the Russians out of the country. At the same time, giving Ukraine a boost of additional morale. It's just a hesitancy, I think. And look, Ukraine's crossed so many red lines right now, and Russia has not acted on those red lines because Russia is limited. Russia is very good at static targets, massing infantry and artillery onto those targets. But once you get Russia into a war maneuver, they're going to lose, and they cannot keep up with the Ukrainians. And Ukraine has the weapon systems today to actually win on the battlefield, particularly now that they have the air support. So it's it would be a risk, but I think President Zelenskyy has demonstrated he's willing to take risk.
Another thing that's interesting, well, we had this development with the F-16. I think this is probably a normal part of operating such aircraft and in the way that Ukraine is doing so. So Ukraine lost its first F-16 and its first pilot that was trained to fly an F-16 this week. But earlier, I believe it was Senator Graham that floated the idea of sending U.S. volunteers to Ukraine to experienced combat pilots to go ahead and operate the F-16s. I'd like to just get your brief thoughts on that. Would that work for Ukraine? And does the United States government have anything to say about it?
Yeah, I think the United States government would have something to say about it because they would consider that to be an escalation, and I think they would consider Russia to consider that an escalation. But look, this has been done before. We did this during the Second World War with the Flying Tigers, authorizing American pilots to fly weapons, aircraft over the Pacific to engage the Japanese. So it's not something that hasn't been done before. But again, this administration is very risk. They're not risk assertive. They are very averse to the point where they do not want to assume those type of risks to escalate. And I think by putting American pilots in the air, they fear there will be air-to-air battles with Russian forces, and that something could occur that would draw, the United States and NATO further into the war.
Okay, well, John Sweet, former intelligence officer for the U.S. military, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts, as always, on all of these subjects. Thank you.
Okay, Don, thanks for bringing me back on.
And that's all for this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us next week for another summary of all the latest events from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Goodbye.